Hello, I'm Darren McDonald. Sudbury.com has invited the candidates running in the June 7th provincial election in Nickel Belt and Sudbury in for a little chat to find out what their views are on some of the topics. Today we're joined by Kevin Brault, who is the Consensus Party of Ontario candidate in Nickel Belt. Welcome, Kevin.
Thanks very much for having me.
Thanks for coming. Ontarians, I think, are hearing about the Consensus Party for the first time. Many people watching this video may have never heard of you before. From what I understand, the leader is the former head of the Reform Ontario Party. And I noticed in your platform you have a lot of sort of the populist ideas that reform. I wonder if you can maybe give people a bit of an idea of just what your party is all about.
Reform would be more of a right-wing party. We're more strictly populist with a set of guiding principles. It's far more focused on the MPPs working directly for their constituents and having the constituents identify what the priorities are. So sort of the way they taught us in grade 10 civics how Parliament was supposed to work, trying to reform it back there and get away from a leader-focused politics to where your MPP actually just works for you, even if it's not necessarily what their party agrees with. If it's what the riding wants, it's what the MPP should work for.
Now, I've always wondered, and that those ideas have been in the public space for a while. I've always wondered how a party that promotes those kinds of ideas would deal with unpopular issues. Sometimes, government policy isn't necessarily popular, even though it's a good idea or needs to be done. How do you govern when basically your MPPs wouldn't be allowed to do anything that their constituents didn't want?
Right. Well, we do have guiding principles. So for things where we'll say it's a human rights issue, the first principle of Consensus Ontario is all people are equal, period, without exception, period. So on matters like that, a lot of unpopular government policy has a tendency to be a communication issue. So people don't understand why it's necessary. And then once they do, people come around. I mean, even this campaign, going around talking to people, the majority of the riding isn't really that interested in a tax cut. And you would think tax cut should be very popular. Who doesn't want to pay less taxes? But people understand there's a relationship between the taxes I pay and the services I receive. And so with the majority of unpopular policies, it's a communication issue from the government. When you get out there and you talk to people, and a big part, what I want to do would be having town hall meetings where you're actually engaging with people. When the public understands, and it's not just slogans, the right path forward is usually going to be the most popular option.
Can you give me an idea of a policy that wasn't popular that just needed to be explained? How does that work, like in practical terms?
Right, well, if we can talk about when women got the vote. It's a very long time ago, but it was quite unpopular. 51% of men, 54% of women said no. But that was a human rights issue, so there would be one issue where you didn't really have to bring the public around. But HST, when it was first introduced as an idea for a tax system, most people were quite opposed to it. And then people started talking, and I mean, I wasn't even a politician. We started talking, you looked out east, it actually worked better. When HST on movie tickets, everybody was all upset, oh, now I got to pay tax to go to the movies. Well, once you explain to people, actually this replaces a 20% tax that was hidden in the ticket, most people. So it was all, I mean, communication does work, and by the time HST came in, most people had accepted it, and maybe they weren't happy about it, but at some level we all understand the government can't just be smiles, right?
I think that that's a great example, because the GST was very unpopular, but people understood, or at least the idea behind it was we were entering a free trade agreement with the United States. We had to remove manufacturing taxes so our manufacturers can compete. And as a sales tax, it's fair. If you have more money, you pay more tax. And there's no, few exceptions. But it was very unpopular. And I don't see how a Consensus Ontario government could pass something like that because people were so opposed to it. So how would that work?
Well, I mean, it works in the territories, and again, you could take the slower path. But most government policies have been worked out in the back rooms for years before we hear about it. So the bigger difference with a consensus government is instead of it working out for years with nobody knowing, is we're informed every step of the way, and then by the time it comes time to take action, there would be a decision made. And it's a founding principle in most Western European democracies, right? It works in some level there. It's halfway to the way they govern in PEI. Like PEI on election night, they don't always know who the premier is going to be. So they gather the next day and they pick from the 12 that got elected who's going to be premier. That's how two of the territories work. And it does function. It's just there's a lot more public scrutiny, and tends to be politicians, I think, who are more afraid of it, because when the whole policy discussion, well, I shouldn't say the whole, but when much of the policy discussion is happening publicly. There's much more opportunity for the public to call you on your words. And that in leader-focused politics, where it's all brand, it's all image, it doesn't really work. So I mean, consensus does not work with the current political culture, but that's kind of the point. We're looking to change it.
Yeah, and that leads me to another question. Your party wants to see political parties gone. You want to see nothing but independence. That certainly works at the municipal level. You mentioned Prince Edward Island. You know, the population of Prince Edward Island isn't much bigger than Sudbury. So you can see how that could work. Provincially, you know, how would that work? Who would be premier? Who would develop policy? Who would?
Right. So, well, the premier would be same way it is in PEI. Of the 122 elected, we could pick. Same would be for cabinet appointments, right? You would somebody would put themselves forward, and then the one that has majority support in the House would take the cabinet role. It would leave our committees completely independent, right? And I understand this is a long way off. It's not going to happen tomorrow, but there's the level of reform we can get in our democratic processes along the way, and I mean people could change. And it's like I was saying to Mark earlier. There's every possibility with consensus that we never get there, because the whole idea is everyone has to support it. And as we're working and we're making, for example, the committees independent, which I still cannot understand why we have a whip controlling committee members. They're supposed to vote based on the evidence in front of them at the parliamentary committee. Why? Why are political parties invading that process in the way they are? As we get closer to that, and we get closer to recall legislation, for example, and we have more riding control over our MPP, people might say, okay, we're good with where we're at right now.
How is that not a formula for a mishmash of policies, of a lack of clear direction? And how do you get consensus on so many complex agendas and priorities when it's difficult enough to do it now under the party system?
Well, the party system, a lot of the problem with the party system is more team loyalty than anything else. And it's true. I mean, there are challenges ahead. There's no way around that. But with public consultation, generally, it's not that hard to get 60% of the people to agree on one thing or another. And it's very hard to get a majority to actually support one full plan, right? So if we look, most majority governments only get in with 40%. So that means 60% of the country said no. But because you got 40% and you happen to squeak by and get enough seats, even though 60% of the province said no, you get to implement your full agenda. That's not really fair. So there's a democratic principle that's lost in the majoritarian system, and we could keep the benefit of our first past the post system, which is we can throw out a government we don't like just like that. Some countries, they never have a full general election. Like the US, it's only a third of the Congress ever running. But here, we keep the drop the writ system. If you don't like the government, you're going to please everybody if you want.
Well, you mentioned having sort of town hall meetings and that sort of thing. And over the years, I've gone to a lot of public meetings, a lot of public consultations, and what tends to happen is the same people come out to every meeting, with a similar agenda. And what I wonder is how, through the formula you guys are talking about, you avoid sort of being dominated by certain small groups who come out to these meetings all the time. How do you make sure you're reaching everyone or the broader public?
Yeah, well, ultimately, democracy is a matter of choosing to participate. We have 45-ish%. The province doesn't even vote. That's their choice, and at some point, okay, the option was yours, and you chose not to take it. But more than just town halls, right now, I mean, we're circulating surveys. There's been province-wide surveys that's being done on phone. There's one on my campaign Facebook page. So there's a lot of different ways you can reach out to people to get a feel from the riding. So it's not, it doesn't have to be exclusively because you are right. When you have 7 p.m. we're going to meet at the arena. There is that select group who come there who are fine because they...
And good for them.
Yep, they're coming out and they're listening to their neighbors as well, most of them. I mean, some people have a pet issue, but most community activists tend to get a feel for the web. But they're still online. I mean, the internet is here to stay and it's going to play a larger and larger role moving forward. There's no reason we can't do that. And if you can fill out a survey, in 10 minutes, twice a year on your phone to help your MPP better understand what you want from the provincial government, I think that will catch on.
Your party is the only one that is promising to balance the books. I think, as soon, you're making it a priority. And I've looked over your platform, and I see talk of balancing the books, but I don't see how you're going to get there. What are you going to cut? What are you going to? What changes?
Yeah.
So maybe give us an idea of that.
Very simple. If we don't do the daycare plan, and we don't do the pharmacare plan, and we don't do Doug Ford's tax cut, the money actually is there.
So how much is that collectively? Because I think what the deficit is about $6 billion. Is that right?
Well, yeah, depends on who you listen to. The Auditor General says it's closer to 12. But if you cut their programs, but like pharmacare is north of $5 billion, the daycare plan is just shy of 3. So if we don't do that and we keep our current tax revenue, instead of driving efficiencies, whatever that means, to pay for a tax cut, we could reasonably balance the budget by the end of year 3. So it's not we're not an immediate thing. And again, for Consensus Ontario candidates, it's for us is what the riding wants. And what I've been hearing from all my neighbors as I've been canvassing, people want to protect the services we have. They don't think now's the right time for a tax cut or for new programs. And protecting the services we have with the goal of balancing the budget in the future. So you don't balance the budget at the expense of, for example, the hospital.
The major cost center, or one of the major issues this campaign has been Ontario Hydro and hydro costs. From what I understand, all the major parties are promising to continue basically public subsidies over the long term to keep rates down. What would Consensus Ontario do?
Well, one of the things we're thinking about is one province, one rate, especially on delivery charges. Now that wouldn't solve the issue for the entire province. That would solve a big part of the problem for most of us in Nickel Belt. So that's obviously the idea as candidate for Nickel Belt I'm championing. The other thing with the one province, one rate system, if we went appropriately with it across the board, is that we get the third-party actors out of the system. So there are these businesses that sell us electricity, but they don't actually produce any, and they don't maintain any hydro lines. They just buy in bulk for a discounted rate and then sell for a profit. That profit's coming from somewhere. So if we had a one province, one rate system, the third-party actors are removed. And then we can also look at things like buying a little more from Quebec, because they're purely hydroelectric, and it's much cheaper. So I don't have a firm number. I know one party's promising to lower by 30%. You can do that with further tax subsidies, but then that tax money also has to come from somewhere, right? So for northern and rural Ontarians, a one province, one rate system would work best, and it would over the long term lower the rates for everybody, because it would get the profiteers who don't actually work on the supply or the delivery end out of the business.
So when you say that you're going to end the pharmacare program, is that the one that provides teens free drugs?
Oh no, that's the NDP's extension of pharmacare with free glasses and the free dental plan.
So what pharmacare, is there an existing pharmacare plan that you would cut? No. Or you just wouldn't do the NDP one?
We would do no service extensions. So we would keep service levels where they are without the proposed extensions, because that's really where the budget math has a problem, that they want to further extend the OHIP Plus program.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a further extension.
And that's just the NDP doing that?
No, the Liberals want to extend what they call OHIP Plus, and the NDP want to do it through what they're calling pharmacare. And then that's just the extension. So what's already in place we would keep. Because the real issue with balancing the budget is how do you pay for the tax cut, or how do you pay for all these new programs? We do have the tax base to support what we have currently.
And if we can finally sort of wrap up, you guys are a populist party. You say you're committed to populism. Ontarians are looking at Doug Ford, and he certainly has elements of a populist agenda, whatever you happen to think of it. How are voters supposed to distinguish between what you're offering and what Ford is offering?
Well, Ford is offering a tax cut that he's promising he can find after we elect him. He can find the money somewhere. We're not. We don't pretend we can drive efficiencies. We don't pretend we can line by line every municipality, which is a part of that plan. There's 444 municipalities in the province of Ontario. You're talking 1,000 accountants would take a year and a half to do it. And there's this other plan that's supposed to save us money, is if the Premier disagrees with how municipalities are spending money, he's just going to cut their funding to try to bring all of our municipal taxes down. I don't care if you get a majority. I don't care if you get every seat in the House. It is not for the Premier to step in and override what we at the municipal level have decided. Right? We vote in municipal elections. We pick our council. We get to watch our council, and it's not for anybody from Toronto or anywhere else to come up here and say, hey, Sudbury, I don't want you spending your money this way. It's our money, it's our choice.
All right, thank you, Kevin, for your time today and for coming in.
Thank you very much for having me.
Remember to cast your vote on June 7th and head to Sudbury.com after the polls close as we bring you live coverage from your local candidate headquarters during election night.